Hey everybody, welcome to Dad, Daughters, and Drinks, where you'll always get at least two of those three. Today, we are just going to jump right into it and continue on with Ren Chapter 6. I guess I need back headphones. He seems nervous at this one.
I'm going to try and hold it together throughout this one.
Uh-oh.
"2015 was the worst year of my life. At the end of 2014, I attended a private UK-based ME specialist clinic called Breakspear. For some reason, the treatments had sent my health nosediving, and I became more sick than I'd ever been. I became so weak that I couldn't walk to the bathroom without needing to lie on the floor to recover. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't read. I couldn't watch TV. All I could do there was lie there in pain. It was obvious during this time that I needed to move back home with my mum again. She moved to Cardiff with a new husband, and they had a spare room, which became my tomb for the next 8 months. At this point, I was so weak that the most that I could manage to do a day was to take a shower. The rest of the time I was confined to my bed. I started reacting even more severely to foods, so every single meal had to be blended into soups or broths to avoid negative reactions. Pain constantly shot through my shin bones and through my feet, like splinters. My stomach would gurgle, and the muscles in my body would constantly twitch, spasm, and ache. My body felt drained of every single ounce of life, and I was so tired, but I was too wired to sleep. I was so full of mental fog that reading a single page on a book seemed impossible. The daylight coming in from behind the curtain hurt my eyes. Loud sounds felt overwhelming. All I could do was wait and pray for sleep, knowing that when I woke from it, nothing would change. I wouldn't feel in any way rested, and all the symptoms would persist. This went on and on and on. It was day after day of physical and mental torture. I thought of concentration camps, of prisoners of war being tortured. At least the escape of death seemed likely. During that time, I never got breaks. My whole body burned. My brain was on fire, and I had nowhere to hide. In the merciful moments where I could concentrate, I tenaciously trawled the internet, looking for ways out. My research drew me to a procedure called a fecal transplant that was having success managing things like Crohn's disease or colitis. It had also gained success in some select cases of autoimmune conditions like MS too. At the time, I felt like much of my issues were caused by dysbiosis, which means an imbalance in your gut flora. I noticed that all the food intolerances started after a large course of antibiotics for the parasite. I wondered if the parasite had wreaked havoc on my microbiome before I nuked it with antibiotics that worsened it further. Fecal transplants can introduce a whole host of probiotic bacteria into your gut, and it can re-establish a healthy homeostasis. In normal person speak, I wanted to pay to put another person's poop in my butthole. I carried on filming videos from my bed, blogging my experience. I was pretty convinced that during this time I wouldn't be alive much longer, and part of me wanted there to be some kind of document of what I'd been through in hopes that it might help someone later down the line.
And if this illness does kill me, then I want this video. I want somebody who can take notice of this video and do something with it.
I had a fundraiser open to save money for the fecal transplant, which was very slowly creeping up. I needed to save $6,000 in total.
I mean, I don't know a lot about the fecal transplant stuff. I mean, I've heard of it a bunch with this whole, gut microbiome thing and so forth. And I, totally believe that it's a thing. Why it would cost $6,000 to have somebody put some poop into your butthole, I don't know. That seems a little extreme, unless like the poop comes with gold flecks or something. I don't know. That seems a little high to me. I mean, then I guess if you asked me how much I would charge to do something to somebody else's butthole like that, yeah, maybe I'd require a lot. I don't know.
transplant, which was very slowly creeping up.
And it does make me wonder, in a country that has socialized medicine, how this works. Is this like a fee that you're still paying to the healthcare system somehow for like a optional procedure that isn't covered in some way, or do you have to go somewhere else to do it? Or are there still like private doctors that do this kind of stuff? I actually have no idea how that works. I barely understand how the American medical system works.
Needed to save $6,000 in total. I remember my girlfriend wanting to come and visit, but telling her that I didn't want her to. There are a few reasons for this. One, I was pretty sure I was going to die soon. The day before Joe died, I'd been sat with him at a pub, catching up, playing pool, cracking jokes. I'd often wondered if I'd have been hit less hard by his death if I'd been away at university when it happened. For my girlfriend's sake, I wanted her to have distance from me. I also felt ugly. I felt unlovable. I was unable to communicate, and I didn't want her to see me like that. I watched my mum look thinner and more frail every day that she had to watch her son deteriorate, and I felt immense guilt. My mum would often walk in and find me either crying on the bathroom or kitchen floor, having no energy to get back into bed. She'd often sit with me and massage my feet, which always hurt, and she'd hum melodies to me like she would do when I was a little boy. During this whole time, I hadn't picked up my guitar. I barely had any sunlight touch my skin, and I lost a lot of weight. I was about 130 pounds at my lowest, about 8 on.
You know, it's interesting. I always, I hear the Ren stories, and I think about things from his perspective. But now that he's talking about his mom like this, I have, my 3 daughters, the ones, from the channel, and the thought of any of them going through something like this breaks my heart.
And I lost a lot of weight. I was about 130 pounds at my lowest, about 8 or 9 stone, which for someone who is 6'1" is very skinny. My average weight is usually about 168 pounds, 12 stone. Every day the same thing. I'd wake up in pain, eat a meal of blended vegetables and chicken, lie with my eyes closed for hours while the world seemed to spin erratically, and I'd often cry as the bones of my legs felt like they wanted to grow out and burst out of my skin. Despite this, what I didn't know is things were about to get a lot worse. Come June, I've been in bed for about 6 months straight. I've regained some energy to leave the house every now and then to go shopping for groceries with my mum, and I've finally reached my target for the fecal transplant, and my mum drove me to the clinic to get the procedure. Everything seemed to go as smoothly as it could for such a bizarre experience. I received a colonic irrigation, which was like a car wash for your colon. Actually feels pretty good.
Like an enema, right?
They then proceeded to put someone else's excrement in my behind. They would repeat this process for 5 consecutive days. When I got home, I realised I felt a little odd, almost manic, and I was hopeful that this meant my energy was coming back. But it wasn't a nice feeling. As the days progressed, I started to feel an innate sense that something was very wrong. It seemed my immune system was going into some sort of overdrive. My brain was buzzing, and the more time that passed, the more uncomfortable I felt. I remember early one morning, I was lying on the kitchen floor after attempting to get a glass of water. My body hurt so much that I was digging my nails into the laminate flooring, screaming.
I think this is what he talks about at the beginning of 7 Sins, right?
My body hurt so much that I was digging my nails into the laminate flooring, screaming, and my mum ran in and asked me what was wrong. I remember repeating, "I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go," over and over again. I felt myself falling down a deep tunnel in my mind, almost as though my entire soul was tumbling down into an abyss. When I finally crashed to the bottom, I was hit with this immense feeling of stillness and peace. I stopped crying. I sat up, and my mother looked at me, puzzled. I've not felt to this day that sort of serenity that I felt in that moment. I looked around the room, and everything seemed to have gained a clarity and quality. But what was most peculiar was the feeling of stillness. There seemed to be some sort of respite from the mental torture and fog in my brain. I still to this day have no explanation for what happened. I looked at my mum, I smiled at her calmly, and I told her that everything was okay now. Her partner Michael came in, and I remember them both looking at me, perplexed. I started speaking fluidly for the first time in months, but it wasn't quite me. I was cracking jokes, being witty. My mum would laugh nervously. I remember feeling as though I was coming up off an ecstasy pill. I felt this underlying feeling of euphoria. I caught myself occasionally erratically snapping my fingers or making whistling noises in between sentences, or staring at some empty part of the room as though there was somebody there. Then
Yeah, when he's first talking about like everything was all calm and everything, in the surface it kind of seems like, oh, good, but you kind of felt like you could see something like this coming where it wasn't necessarily a sign of things being good.
Or staring at some empty part of the room as though there was somebody there, then snapping back to the space and talking to my mum. This feeling of intense euphoria lasted about 48 hours. During this time, I'd adopted some newer strange behaviours. Everything in my room that wasn't parallel bothered me, so I had to make sure it was aligned and facing the same direction. The whistle and the finger click became a new tick, and it started rising in frequency the more time that elapsed. I also noticed that I get stuck on words or sentences when talking to my mum. For example, if I was saying a sentence like, "I'm not sure how I'm feeling today," I would sometimes get stuck on the whole sentence or just a word from it and repeat it about 30 or 40 times before I could move on to the next. So I'm not sure how I'm feeling today, feeling today, feeling today, 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 over and over. I
wonder if this is a known phenomenon. Like, I've never heard of anything like this that I can recall. So I wonder if there's like a term for everything that he's talking about where you have just this massive strange symptoms that last for 48 hours. And I don't know what happens at the end of that, if it all goes away and he feels terrible again. But I wonder, like, if anybody knows if there's a term for this or if it's a commonly known thing, let me know.
can't really explain why, but it's like saying it carved out a safe space for me. After about 2 days, that feeling of peace and euphoria was swapped out for a feeling of immense dread and doom. I felt fear fill my body, unlike any fear that I've ever felt. I'd often wake up in the early hours of the morning screaming at the top of my lungs, a torturous scream that would fill the whole house, a scream like my legs were being sawn off. I felt pure terror. My mum would run in and try and calm me down. Sometimes I'd be thrashing, hitting the mattress, pounding the walls. It usually ended up in me exhausting myself and her stroking my head in her lap as I sobbed and repeated the same words over and over again.
I don't have a medical background, but I do have kind of a biology background. And I really wonder, like, what caused all this. Like, it sounds neurological, and he got it from some feces. Like, was there some sort of chemical from the feces, like some sort of a hormone or something that, like, got into his bloodstream and got up into his brain and wreaked havoc or something? Boy, this is really fascinating. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's horrible, but it's just something I've never heard before.
Everything in these moments terrified me. The compulsion to make everything parallel became a necessity. Whenever I was in the kitchen or car and the dials were facing the wrong way, it taunted me. My mum started taking me to a weekly talk therapist in hopes it would stop me from killing myself. I did catch myself researching the most painless ways to do it. I often daydreamed about death, and it made me feel at peace. At this point, intense paranoid delusions started creeping in. I wondered if what was happening to me was demonic. I don't remember how I got there, but I remember one time speaking on the landline to someone who claimed to be an expert in dark magic. He told me that being around my mum was bad for me. He told me that she was bad. He told me that I needed to do a ritual with black wax candles in order to free myself.
Mm-hmm.
I remember ordering black candles from eBay, and when they arrived, I had a change of heart, and I decided against doing this dark magic ritual. I fell asleep that night, and I woke up the next day to find the candles totally melted onto the white mantelpiece that they were on. They'd never been lit. I still don't really know for certain if anything of these things happened, but the melted wax was definitely real. I remember picking it off with my nails. There were moments that my rational mind knew that I was hallucinating. Sometimes in the night I would hear perfect string quartet symphonies with no sound source for them to be coming from. I remember one time my mum took me with her to the post office because during this time I'd rarely been left in the house alone. I remember the lady behind the till reaching for some sellotape. As she tugged on the tape, it sounded as though it had been amplified 1,000 times. It was deafeningly loud. I ran out of the store crying and shaking, and I sat in the passenger seat of my mum's car, rocking back and forth, where she found me uncontrollably sobbing, repeating the words, I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't, over and over again.
You know, I talked about this being chemically induced, and he mentions the demonic thing, and whatever it is, I don't know, but I do know I have a close relative who, when he was younger, had a lot of strange hallucinations. I'm talking like, probably young teen, maybe to later teen, and maybe even in the 20s, like very wakeful daytime hallucinations that just seemed completely real. Sometimes they were terrifying, sometimes they were just strange. Eventually they went away. I know he went to therapy, and I don't know if that was related to it going away or if it just went away on its own. But very, very straight. The causes of these things and how you have to deal with them have to just be like dealing with something like this on top of all of the physical pain. I guess you're just having mental snaps, like of the biggest proportion.
My paranoia grew. I boomeranged between thinking I may have been latched onto by some demonic entity, and I became suspicious of even my own family, to thinking I might be part of some sort of twisted experiment, where a group of observers were seeing how far they could push me before I snapped and shattered. My irrational mind concluded that if I start behaving in unexpected ways, I might confuse the people conducting this experiment, and they'd shut it down. I'd sit in my own bed, manically grinning in response to the jolt of pain in my legs. I'd say things to Mum and Michael which made no sense at all. This all seemed to be leading up to a very unusual day. I can't quite recall the details of how it happened because it was quite tricky to tell what was reality and what was not. But from what I remember, I was in the car with my mum, parked outside a supermarket, and I'd put my laptop on the roof of the car while I'd helped her with groceries. I'd forgotten it was there, and she drove off. It wasn't until about an hour later I noticed, and I started panicking. My laptop had on it hundreds of songs from my time in Brighton. It was all I had really to show for my life. I was already in such an emotionally fragile space that losing that felt like some sick, torturous joke. We drove back and searched every place it could be with no luck. As we were driving home, my mum pulled up at a junction and something in me snapped. I got out of the car and I ran away from it. I convinced myself this was still part of the experiment, because what else could explain that sort of luck? Once I got far enough away, I proceeded to strip off all my clothes, and I lay in the middle of a road staring up at the sky, laughing in hysterics. This was the opposite of how one should react to losing their computer, and so it seemed like the perfect way to confuse my observers. With time, the police showed up, as did my mother. By some miracle, she convinced them not to take me in or section me, and by a further miracle, they also relayed to my mum that a dented laptop had been handed in an hour earlier. I took this as meaning my experiment had worked. I eventually snuck off as my mum was talking to them. I wandered slowly around this unfamiliar village until I encountered the second angel I would meet in my...
It's not necessarily meant to be funny, but just the fact that, it worked, it's kind of funny, looking back on it. I'm sure at the time it wasn't, but good for him that he was able to fool the observers.
I wandered slowly around this unfamiliar village until I encountered the second angel I would meet in my life, this time in the form of a black homeless man. I'm not sure how we got there, but as I was walking, I turned to my side, and a man dressed in tattered grey clothes was walking beside me. He asked me what was wrong, and I explained the best I could the events of the day. I explained that I'd been sick a very long time, that I was tired, so tired, and that I just wanted to be better. The homeless man paused. He put his hand on my shoulders, and he stared into my eyes. His eyes had a light grey tint. They were almost white, and something about his presence made me feel incredibly safe, incredibly still. He smiled, a kind smile, and he said to me, "Everything's going to be okay, Ren." And then he vanished. I hadn't told him my name. I never hallucinated anything after that day. I have no real explanation for that day. I chalk it down to a psychotic episode or stress-induced hallucination, but the events which follow put a lot of questions in my mind. What he said to me was very simple, but also very needed. I realise a lot of people might hear these stories and just presume I'm a bit mad, a bit weird, like I do when people tell me their ghost stories. All I can do is tell you my experience and let you derive your own conclusions from it. Anyway, I got home and I started to obsessively research ways to escape this new seemingly psychotic space I was in. It's a strange thing to describe.
It's interesting that he uses the term angels for these situations, kind of considering his whole, I don't know what you call it exactly, not belief system, but, all of the other things he's talked about with religions, that he a lot of times likes the imagery from religions, but at the same time doesn't really believe in any of them necessarily. And I think the fact that, none of them seem to help when he wanted them to, doesn't help any of that. And a lot of people, I think, struggle with religions as opposed to belief in God, which are, kind of two different things. They're related, obviously, but I think a lot of people, and I'm kind of guessing at this, but I think a lot of people think that there's probably something. They just think that none of the religions that exist currently really make a lot of sense for what they would think that God would mean, I guess, in a way. And so sometimes I wonder if that's kind of where Ren falls, in that he thinks there's something, and, it seems to be out there. He's talking about the angels, but there's just always problems, I think, that he has with different religions, rightfully so. So anyway, it's just kind of an interesting thing.
Search ways to escape this new seemingly psychotic space I was in. It's a strange thing to describe, but it was like me, Ren, was in the passenger seat of my mind while some other entity was steering the ship. I was watching myself do things like scream at night or repeat words over and over, and I think to myself, damn, that's pretty crazy. But I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Every now and then I had moments of lucidity where I was more in control. I was doing things like stimming, I had night terrors, vocal tics.
Was that term stimming?
I was doing things like stimming.
What is stimming? I don't think I've ever heard of that. I'm familiar with night terrors, vocal tics.
I had night terrors, vocal tics. I'd stutter and I'd stammer. And for me, a lot of that lined up with some sort of transitory or stress-induced autism. I'd known a family with an autistic teenager, and some of the behaviour seemed to line up, which led me to a new pathway of online research. I came across this support group for a subset of children with autism called PANDAS, P-A-N-D-A-S. It was believed that these kids had the neurological infection of the Streptococcus bacteria that was causing these autistic-like behaviours. I was presenting with some similar behaviours. These kids...
It's interesting. He says it sounded like they had a neurological infection of the strep bacteria. And I wonder if there's some reason that they can't test for that. I mean, he made it sound like it wasn't sure, like they believe that might be the case. I guess, I don't know if there's a problem with how the bacteria would get into the brain. So maybe people don't believe it, or maybe like you think maybe it's there, but you can't really test for it because you can't, like, you have to cut into somebody's brain, I guess, to try and figure out if there's strep in it. Maybe they find like byproducts of strep in the bloodstream that could have crossed the brain-blood barrier. Oh, it's kind of interesting stuff. Obviously, I tend to lean a lot of these things towards like the biological, just because of my younger days when I actually did biology.
Streptococcus bacteria that was causing these autistic-like behaviours. I was presenting with some similar behaviours. These kids would do long courses of antibiotics and their symptoms would diminish or disappear, and they'd be seemingly normal children again. I speculated that the fecal transplant introduced a whole host of new bacteria into my gut, but that I didn't have the immune regulation to be able to control it, and it had sent my entire system into some sort of inflammation overdrive. I researched the most effective antibiotic for Streptococcus, one being penicillin, and I convinced my mum to take me to the doctor, where I faked a stomach bug. I lied to him, and I said I'd had similar things in the past, and the penicillin cleared it right up. He reluctantly prescribed me a 2-week course of antibiotics because I was so persistent. I got home and I started the course. Initially, I felt fucking awful, somehow even more tired than usual, And then towards the end of the course, I noticed a definite shift in my energy and comfort. By the end of the course, my psychotic behaviours had disappeared and my energy felt a lot better. I stayed indefinitely on various herbal antibiotic supplements like oregano oil at this time, having learned that this was also active against certain pathogenic bacteria. Keep in mind also, I'm just going off script right now, keep in mind if I'd have followed the advice of most of the doctors that I'd seen at the time who were talking to me about my psychotic behaviours, I would have probably been put into a mental facility and medicated with medication that I didn't need and would have probably gotten a lot worse. So it was very lucky that I took no one tells you that antibiotics can treat psychosis, and these antibiotics did actually treat my psychosis. And I was no stranger to the placebo effect. I'd taken everything, it wasn't placebo. It didn't matter. After about a week, I'd finished the course and some of my more familiar symptoms like fatigue and pain started creeping back again. But that didn't matter because what this whole experience had taught me was that the origin of my sickness was in fact bacterial and it was pathogenic. The biggest thing it taught me was I could actually do something about it. I was no stranger to the placebo effect after years of trialing different drugs and supplements. This wasn't placebo. I took to the internet again and found a world-renowned specialist over in Brussels who was also leading a lot of the cutting-edge research for ME. I got on the phone and made an appointment. He was booked up for the next 9 months, but that gave me enough time to save money. The antibiotics and new herbs I was taking had also given me a new lease of life, and the hope for a cure made me more determined than ever. I started having enough energy to go on walks, which was huge for me at the time. My dad would drive over to my mum's and we'd go out in the car, and I'd take photos of wildlife on beaches. I was picking up my guitar again after months in bed. I eventually invited my girlfriend over and made the decision to move back to Brighton as soon as I was strong enough to. It was around this time that I started working on the album Freckled Angels. I knew that the future tests weren't going to be cheap. I pulled together some old tracks from the days I was working with Sony, and I got hold of Eric and asked his permission to release them, which he graciously granted, so thank you, Eric. I then pulled together some newer material and compiled my first ever album from my bedroom. In those days, I had no real way of promoting myself and no energy to do shows, so it was mostly to be listened to by my friends and family. I named the album Freckled Angels after Joe. Joe was covered head to toe in freckles, and it seemed fitting to dedicate this work to one of the coolest and funniest people I ever knew. Any ounce of energy I did have from my limited reserves, I'd pour into recording that album. It's by no means a work of art, and it's a bit thematically disjointed, but some songs like Crutch or Pocket Full of Pain went a long way to photographing that time. I'm going to leave you with a recording of Pocket Full of Pain. Back in those days. Enjoy.
Before we get into the song, I was just, for some reason, I was thinking earlier today when he was talking about losing his laptop and it had all these songs that he had written. And I was thinking about, he mentioned in one of his interviews, and I forget who it was with, that he had this hard drive that of all these songs that he had written in various states of completion. Well, he was sick, and the guy said, "How many songs do you think there are on the hard drive?" And I think he said around 1,000. And just imagine, like, finding that hard drive. Maybe there weren't a full 1,000 on it at the time or anything, but just imagine, like, somehow you got a hold of that hard drive and could listen to all those, unfinished songs. How amazing that would be. I mean, some of them may even be finished and just, he's decided not to release them for whatever reason. But yeah, I think that would be pretty amazing.
Da 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 da. Yeah, 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 yeah. I watch the sun when it rises, when it's climbing the sky. I sit here with the pocket full of pain. I've got tears in my juice, in my mind. There's a noose, but my hope makes me cling to the day. I wanna run with the sun and the moon and the stars till I'm running faster than my pain. I wish I could breathe out this fear, this doubt, send it into the Milky Way. I got my finger on the trigger of a Magnum 44, but survival instinct won't let me bleed. I wanna put a bullet straight in my cerebral tissues place, but my index finger won't let me squeeze. I wanna skate down my vein with the blade till the blood runs thicker than the thoughts in my head. But don't ask me why this.
I've listened to this song a bunch of times before, but I must not have listened close enough because these lyrics are brutal.
Blood runs thicker than the thoughts in my head. But don't ask me why this is not my goodbye. It's a suicide failure attempt. Dum, 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 dum. I choose life, I choose life, I choose living. Put the bottles and the pills down, I stand up, I breathe with precision. Calm washes over me like a break in the storm. I close my eyes for a minute, then my troubles transform, and I travel deep into the corners of my mind. I remember the first time I felt hopeless. I think I was 5, cause at the hands of this bully, the lessons that I learned is that this world is not so beautiful. Sometimes it can be burnt by the fires of evil that are living inside the common people just like you and like I. We'll all strive to survive, and we all climb to the top over our brothers and sisters, whether we mean to or not. And we get lost in the tide of insecurities and power-seeking fooleries, but happiness don't live inside no jewelleries. In an age of distraction, we would rather tap on our iPhones than stop a war from happening. It's heartbreaking, Satan's patiently waiting for us to mess up big time, so hell on earth will be blatant. So forgive me for wanting to blow my brains out, but I've got a change of heart. It's time for change now, rearrange now, fist in the sky. I say proud, say loud, revolution word on my brain now. It's with the people, yeah, power's with the people. If the people strive for unity, the world it could be equal. You could be the start of the beginning, a dawn of no stress, no troubles, no sinning, just living. So overthrow evil and greed, put aside your distractions, welcome change with me, welcome change with me, welcome change with me, welcome change, welcome change, welcome change with me, welcome change with me, now welcome change with me, now welcome change, welcome change, welcome change with me. Yeah, 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 yeah. And da 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 do.
I've never seen that before. Yeah, it's the whole Freckled Angels album is an interesting thing for me because there's a lot of songs that I like on it, and there's actually some that I don't like so much. Nothing that I really don't like, but there's just some that I tend not to listen to because I don't like them as much as the other stuff, and I almost feel bad about that. Something about it that I just feel like I should like every one of his songs. And I was reading on Reddit one day where they were talking about some of his Freckled Angels songs, and there were apparently in some live stream discussions he had actually forgotten he even wrote some of them, and some that he said that he didn't like either. So it made me feel a little better about maybe not liking all of them. I don't know if anybody that watches is on like the Ren subreddit, but like there's one guy that posts these. Usually, I think it's about once a day. He has these 3 picture puzzles. Well, it's just 3 random pictures of things that are from a Ren song, and you have to try and guess what the song is. That's always a fun daily puzzle to do. Stuff like that. That's there's a lot of good Ren stuff on Reddit if you aren't familiar with it. Some good discussions of things. I actually wish it were a little more active than it is, but it's still a lot of good stuff. But yeah, so this is one of those songs that I've listened to, and I caught most of it, but some of those lyrics in the beginning, like I said, those were kind of brutal. But it's the thing that I got thinking about just watching this performance is that guitar part that was recorded, and it was, I don't know if it was a specific loop where he just played the whole thing, but it's a pretty simple, straightforward guitar part, and it kind of highlights how I think a lot of people tend to think about being a famous musician means you need to have like some sort of virtuosic talent. When I was in college, I played guitar a lot, and I was reasonably good. I wasn't amazing or anything, but there were some people that said something about, if I'd ever wanted to go pro. And I was like, that's not my thing. Like, I can play stuff that other people have written, but writing stuff has just never been anything I've been very good at or wanted to do. I had no interest in doing it. It's something I would rather just not have to play, right? There's nothing that's going to make you not like doing something, probably, than if you feel like it's a burden to do because you have to do it. But these kind of songs where you watch people play simple things and still write amazing lyrics and, you know, just kind of have fun with it a little bit. I mean, clearly he was having some fun with it there, even though the content's rough. And he was probably in a lot of pain when he was doing it. But, you know, that just goes to show his love for music. And so I've always said that the true artists are the people that can write stuff, right? It's not about being able to play things. It's about being able to write things that are unique, that touch people, and you know, things that people can really resonate with. And I think that's what he does, just, you know, better than just about anybody, at least anybody that I can think of offhand, right? And, you know, maybe you can figure out some other artists that are doing the same thing, and I'm just not thinking of them, or, you know, maybe I haven't heard them. There's a lot of people that haven't heard of Ren, and maybe would actually be touched by his music, but, you know, he's still not, I don't think, anywhere near where he should be in terms of, you know, being in the public psyche, but, you know, I think he'll get there. In any case, chapter 6, that was a rough one. That was a really rough one, but at least I feel like we're now getting to the turning point. I was wondering in the chapter 5 video if we were going to get to the turning point in all of these chapters. And it sounds like we've got there just at the end of 6. He's going to Brussels. This is going to be the guy that figures out Lyme disease. And then, you know, presumably the California thing will be happening as well. So yeah, I'm not sure where all of this is going to go. Well, you know, I know where it's going to go in a way, but where it's going to end specifically, you know, I have no idea. If he's going to come right up into today, or if he's going to get to the end of chapter 8, and that's going to be, you know, right where, you know, he starts, you know, doing high Ren or whatever, right, stuff. It'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to the next couple of videos. Unfortunately, I'll be traveling the next, you know, 4 days starting tomorrow. So I probably won't get another chapter out until Tuesday. Probably not even Tuesday. Probably not till Wednesday. So it'll be almost a week. So anyway, sorry about that. I'll warn you in advance, but they will be coming. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope everybody's doing well, and I hope you are all taking care of yourselves, and I will see you again on the next one. Bye.